Hi everyone, my name's Jenny and I'm a British English teacher. Today's lesson is all about how to use unless. So unless can be a little bit confusing. Basically it means if not. It's a negative if. And so I'd really recommend being confident with your basic conditional sentences with if before you start to look at unless in more detail. If you haven't seen my lesson about conditionals, I'll leave a link to that lesson in the description box. We can use unless in the 4 types of conditional sentences, the 0, the first, the second and the third types of conditional. However, it's much more common to find unless in the 0 and first conditionals. So the first thing that we're going to do is look at an example of unless in a 0 conditional sentence. We always meet on Friday afternoons unless one of us has to work. And if we transform that into an if conditional, it would be, we always meet on Friday afternoons if one of us doesn't have to work. Now let's look at unless in a first conditional sentence. For example, you won't pass the exam unless you study. As you can see here in our result clause, we have will or won't because it's negative. Okay, so you won't pass the exam. And in the conditional clause, unless, we have the present simple, unless you study. Now, if we look at that in an if conditional, we would see you won't pass the exam if you don't study. And it's exactly the same meaning as you won't pass the exam unless you study. Okay, moving on to the unreal conditionals, the second and the third conditionals. Like I said at the beginning, you are not as likely to see unless in second and third conditionals, but it's useful to see a couple of examples so you can see when it might be used. For example, she wouldn't behave like that unless something bad happened. And in an if conditional, it would be, she wouldn't behave like that if something bad didn't happen. Okay, and then with the third conditional, which is even less likely than the second conditional, and this is because we don't use unless for things we know to be true. And as we know with the third conditional, it's about things in the past. So we often know what happened or didn't happen. So we often know what is true or what was true. So for this reason, it's not as common to see unless in third conditionals, but we will have a look at an example. He wouldn't have gone to the party unless he had been invited. In this case, I don't know if he went to the party or not. I know he wouldn't have gone if he hadn't been invited, but I don't know. Like I said, as the third conditional refers to the past, we are more likely to know what happened or didn't happen. So for example, we can't say, I wouldn't have studied English unless I had liked it, because I know that I liked English. So I can't use unless in these cases. Another example when we can't use unless is, I don't know what I would have done unless I had seen you. But I did see you. Okay, so I can't use unless in this case because I know that I saw you. I know what was true. So the only way that we can express this third condition is, I don't know what I would have done if I hadn't seen you. I'm speculating about how things could have been different if something hadn't happened in the past. So I know that's a bit difficult. If in doubt, avoid unless in the second and third conditionals and use negative if. Unless is really useful for the 0 and first conditionals. Okay, your turn to practice. I will give you the negative if conditional and you transform it into an unless conditional. For example, you won't get the job if you don't have experience. You won't get the job unless you have experience. Okay, the second one. You won't improve if you don't practice. You won't improve unless you practice. And the last one, you can't go to the party if you don't tidy your room. You can't go to the party unless you tidy your room. So one last note from me on unless. Sometimes we use unless to add extra information to what we have just said. She should be here by now. unless she has forgotten. Oh, I don't have any apples unless my flatmate remembered to buy some. That's today's lesson on unless. I hope it's been useful. Last year I made a lesson about when to use unless and when to use until. If you haven't seen that lesson yet, I will also leave a link to that in the description box along with the conditionals lesson. As always, thanks for watching. Bye for now.